This worked just fine before. All right, now. All right, now
I see it again.
Now I have the go
Zoom
live.
is preparing to talk.
All right, we're going live. This may take a few seconds. Okay, so here we are. We are actually live again. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, right? But here we are. And welcome everybody to the very, very first Automotive Inclusion Council LinkedIn Live panel. So look forward to a few more of these. And if you're wondering what the Automotive Inclusion Council is, I'm going to tell you about that. I really couldn't think of a better way to celebrate Women's History Month than to have a discussion with 4 amazing leaders in our industry from different sectors. So the Automotive Inclusion Council is an evolving council. We actually just changed our name yesterday in a member meeting. And you may have seen some meetings, come to some meetings, and we're currently made up of 13 member organizations who we all really want to stop talking about the problem and focus on the solution. And we believe that the solution is inclusion. And, so we're a group that recognizes that the 3 problems that we talk about all the time, turnover, the gender gap, and our ability or sometimes inability to attract talent are really symptoms. And the cure for these symptoms is inclusion. So this is a group that comes together collectively and collaboratively, and we're going to try and move the needle. So we'd love to add your name to our voice. A collective voice is what we're looking for. So please reach out and we can talk more about that. So, but joining me today are 4 amazing women who, you know what, I'm really grateful. I wore my thankful shirt today because as I was getting ready for this, I thought, each of these women I call my friend. I've gotten to know each of you. And so Tiffany Hamilton joins us today. She is the Director of DEI and Communications with TrueCar. Kathleen Long is Chief Revenue Officer at RepairPal. Tracey Fields, Chief Experience Officer at Premier Automotive Group. And of course, Kathy Gilbert, Senior Director, Minority Dealers, Women Retail at CDK. So ladies, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Are you ready?
Ready.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So we've talked a little bit about how this is going to go. And so, one thing that's always really, really interesting to me is to discover how we got into automotive. Sometimes there's some similarities, sometimes there's differences, but even more, I love to hear about your path. Like, how did you get where you are? Especially you are 4 powerful leaders, in our industry. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. And also, if you're feeling it a little, I'd love to know a fun fact, right, about you that maybe people don't know. So if you're feeling brave. So Kathleen, I'd like to start with you.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're starting with me. I fell backwards into automotive. I never had any intention of getting into auto. And so I worked in fintech before this. Last company I worked for was actually Bill.com, and they had a really nice go public kind of story. But when I left there, I was looking for something else to do. And I thought that I would stay in the industry that I was in, was pursuing all these opportunities to do that. And a recruiter came out of left field. He was a really compelling, interesting person who got to know me as a person. So, that for me is kind of everything, right? As we're talking about inclusion. So he made a good first impression, but, he introduced me to RepairPal and to our CEO, Art. And they convinced me that even though I don't know anything about what goes on under the hood of a car, and now I can speak to it a bit, but you still wouldn't want me under there doing anything for you, right? That, there was a place in automotive for me, and that the skills that I had were exactly what they were looking for at RepairPal. And so I said, I said I was looking for something different. The universe delivered something different to me. And so I decided to make the leap. And interestingly, my dad was an automotive mechanic when I was a little girl. He eventually went to work for Boeing, working on a slightly larger machine, where he eventually retired after 30 some odd years of working there. And so he was stoked. He called me on the first date talking shop literally. And I'm like, Dad, I've been at this company for 1 day and I have no idea what you're talking about. But it's been a really fun adventure. In the first 6 to 12 months, I kind of thought like, what am I really doing here? Like, what's my why? I'm not like this super car enthusiast kind of gal. Like, what am I doing here? And I realized that this inclusion aspect and, the lack of diversity in many automotive spaces and in the industry as a whole, that's the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why the universe placed me here. And so I've really found an expanded mission beyond, the mission and the role that I have at Repair Pal. So in addition to having a great team and a, wonderful boss who is my partner in running the business at this point, I also have this place in industry with, my friends on, obviously on this call and elsewhere about creating spaces for people. So fun fact about me in the job realm that a lot of people don't know is that I've been working most of my life. So I grew up in a family that by American standards would be considered a poor family. And so we were always working. So one of my first jobs at like 7 or 8 years old was milking goats. And my mother also took in laundry. And so I spent many, many hours as a child actually at an ironing board. I still would milk a goat. I don't like to iron. So that's how those two first jobs kind of worked out for me.
These fun facts. Thank you, Kathleen. These fun facts. I love it. You're the first person who's got me beat. I started working at 11
Oh,
of family business, right? So
yeah.
I love it. I love it. So Tiffany,
Yes.
let's talk
So
about your entry.
I'd love to share a little bit about that. I'm a little bit like Kathleen as well. I kind of fell into automotive. So in the beginning of my career, I worked in nonprofits. I worked in some tech startups as well, but I really had spent most of my career in higher education, in online education. I was a product manager. I had also I was a program director as well, really leaning into learning and development, curriculum design, and running programs. And one of the things after being there for several years was I was really interested in diversity, equity, inclusion. And this was coming up in different ways, sometimes outside of work and some of the nonprofit organizations that I was involved with. I also did training and consulting around DEI. And at a certain point, I was kind of noticing like tons of my work around DEI, I love, but that's not really what my job is. And so when this opportunity came up with TrueCar to really focus on diversity, equity, inclusion for my role, I thought, why not? And I have to admit, this was the first time in the industry. I've only been in the industry for about 2.5 years, specifically with TrueCar, but it felt like this was a place that I could also have an impact. At that time, so many industries were really looking at and focusing on DEI, and it felt like I could have a positive role to play and really support and be a leader in this area. So that's how I kind of fell into the industry. And then a fun fact about myself. So when I think about some of the other women in my family as well, my grandmother, my mother, and I were all on The Price is Right separately. And
wow.
and my grandmother was the big winner. She actually won the Showcase Showdown and everything. So, just a little bit of a fun fact when I'm thinking about other women in my life too.
I am so jealous, Tiffany. We have to talk about this.
So am I.
Yes, so I can give you some secrets that I think about just helping you get on the show, but
And and separately, not even as a family.
yes, separately. I was there when my grandmother, when she taped and filmed. I was not there when my mom was on the show. And then obviously I was there for me.
That is an amazing fun fact. Tracey,
Oh gosh, how do I follow those fun facts? Well, anyway, I guess I'll go with what I know. But yes, actually, unlike everyone else, I didn't fall into the car business. I grew up around it. I have a dad who's a car dealer. He's retired now, but so I grew up on dealerships. And in college, if I was home summers and holidays, I was expected to get a job. And my options were to work for him or find a job. And I thought, well, oh, it'll be so easy. I'll just go work for my dad. And, I don't know if any of you all have worked for parents. It's not easier, it's harder. There's a whole separate set of rules for you. And I got my eyes opened really quick. But, I liked being in the dealerships. I was comfortable around it. So, um, as long as I steered clear of him, I really enjoyed it. So, that's kind of how I got into it. And I continued to work summers and holidays through college. And when I got out of college, I took a job at a dealership because it's what I knew, but I took it with the intentions of leaving 6 months later because I was going to move out of state and pursue something completely different. And that's not what happened. So I took a job, and they found out I had a little bit of exposure in dealerships. And the man I worked for was young and gave young people a lot of opportunity. And the woman that hired me was like, you want to start doing a little backup here, backup there. And before I knew it, I was being shuffled around into different departments. And here I am a million years later. So that's how I got into it. And I'm just in a car family. I have a brother in it. My husband's a car guy. I met my husband in it. So that's kind of one of my fun facts. I met my husband in the car business. The other one is I cannot cook. I can't cook. But thankfully my husband can. So that's about as fun as you're going to get from me. I even told him last night, I said, I don't have a fun fact. I was like, my whole everything is related to work, even meeting you, so.
Right.
And then I thought, well, I can't cook. Most women probably can. I can't, so not well, at least.
Listen, I don't like to cook.
It's not just I don't like to. The few times I try, I just don't do it well. And I'm like, why
Sometimes.
am I doing this to myself? So anyway, so I grew up in it, around it, and I was just drawn to it. So I'm comfortable in it, in the auto business.
Tracey, I love that you've done pretty much everything in the store.
What's funny is I've done everything but sell a car or worked on a car, so it's funny because somehow I've managed not to do any of that stuff, but like day to day operationally, I've been exposed to everything, which is when you've been in it this long, you absorb it without even realizing you absorb it, so all the meetings you sit through, all the different department meetings you sit through, inevitably you absorb it. Even though I have never sold a car, I've sat through a lot of trainings on how to do it, or I've helped put together trainings on how to do it, that kind of thing. So yeah, I've kind of been inserted everywhere, which is awesome.
I am sure that if you ended up on the sales floor, you'd be top sales for the first
I'd
month.
make a lot of friends. I like to talk to everybody.
That's what they tell me it's all about. Kathy.
Yes.
So I am like Kathleen and Tiffany in that I stumbled into the automotive industry as well. I have a master's and a bachelor's degree in business administration and computer science. And so technology has always been close to my heart. And so when I first got out of school, I started as a programmer analyst at National Cash Register, NCR in Dayton. And a friend of mine, and I'll talk a lot about the value of mentors and those that are close, because they mentioned that this was an opportunity at CBK or then ABP that I would love. And so I said, okay, technology is what I do, is creating a new role. And they were rolling out a new product at the time where we were actually moving away from paper forms in dealerships to digitized forms. And that was kind of the first, and it was an amazing opportunity. But that's how I got exposed to the automotive industry. And what I would tell you is that once I got exposed to it, I am still in this industry because of the people, and not just the people that I work with, but also the customers. because when you start to help customers and that really want to grow their business, it's just an exciting place. I'm very passionate about minorities and women. And so most of my career, in July, I'll be celebrating 30 years with CDK. Most of that has been advocating for minority dealers and advocating for women. So when you think about those roles, there's a passion. I can tell you that I love the automotive industry. I can't tell you, that I know a whole lot about cars myself, but I can talk about software. I can talk about, how we advocate and support our customers and our dealers. And when I thought about my fun fact, I went through a whole bunch of other things because there's a lot of kind of fun little nuggets to share. But the one that just kind of resonates is I collect $2 bills. My dad, when I was in high school, gave me a $2 bill, and it was like one of the best things because it was for a project that I had completed. I was so proud of, and that was kind of the reward he gave me. And over the years, I collect them. And you think about the $2 bill, the $2 bill is kind of diverse in and of itself because it's not your standard currency, the $1, $5, the 10, the 20, and the bigger bills. But that $2 bill is special. And so I do collect them right now. I have about 40. And it's a kind of a good feeling. So that's a little fun fact about
That's neat.
I bet you get about 20 more after this live.
it. Please send them all to me. I'm 100% active collector. Please send them.
And that is really
Send them to Kathy.
right.
Yeah.
That is really a sweet story too, right? And of connection. Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you all for sharing these fun facts. So we'll move on to the second kind of topic question, which is allyship. So if you know me, you know that allyship is one of my favorite things to talk about. I always kind of like to say that I'm an aspiring ally, because ally is not a designation to me. It's not a hat that I put on. It's really more about action. And for me, that's been learning how to examine what power I might have, and how I can use that power to support underrepresented communities, as women are in automotive, right? As part of the reason why we're here, why there's organizations that are focused purely on women in automotive. So what I'd love for you all to share about is your experience with allyship in your career. Who has been an ally for you? How have they been an ally for you? Have you been able to be an ally for someone else? That, I don't know, that Pay It Forward. Remember that movie? Well, I'm dating, well, we all know how old I am. That Pay It Forward idea. So Tiffany, this time I'm going to start with you.
Great. So when I think about allyship, there are a few people that come to mind. I had one supervisor who really showed allyship by consistently recognizing and amplifying my contribution in spaces, places, and rooms that I was not, which is really important. This person was in the C-suite, so they were in meetings, in rooms that I for sure was not, but they were always advocating and amplifying my DEI work, the initiatives and projects that we were working on. So not really just to ensure that there were eyes and ears on these projects and people were not just hearing about them, but they really understood the strategy and the work behind what we were doing in DEI. And then when I think back previously, like earlier in my career, when I was much more junior, I had a specific supervisor that was the dean of our college, and she put me on this very high stakes, high profile, very visible project to really help lead one of our first accreditation site visits at the college. And this project, it brought a lot of visibility to my work ethic, my leadership skills, and my dedication to the project, but it also just stretched beyond our small team, our college. It went across the university. And this person was a mentor for me. When I think back to that time, it honestly is probably one of the times that I was most stressed out in my career with everything that was going on with that accreditation site visit. But it was also one of the times that sticks with me so much because she was such a mentor to me, and I had kind of this huge growth spurt and learning opportunity. And so I appreciated having such a high visibility stretch project because it really brought my reputation up within the organization and helped really build more confidence for me professionally. And then when I think of my current role here as Director of DEI and Communications, I believe that it's important for me to serve as an ally across TrueCar. I really want to ensure that employees across the organization know that I'm an ally. They can come to me with questions, concerns, or feedback. And I also like to make sure that when I'm doing this work, I'm taking that pause to think about who's not in the room as we're creating policies and procedures. I need to also do that work that I train and teach people to do, to pause, to reflect, and to make sure that I'm being that voice in these rooms for those that are underrepresented as well. And so that's how I like to think of myself as an ally right now, making sure that I'm doing the work that I train others to do and to be that voice. And just like you said, Sandy, it's important that we think about allyship, not as a noun, but as a verb. It takes action and how we each show up every day to be an ally, to take that extra step to learn as well.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing your experience. And I'm really struck because, allyship action doesn't have to be all the time a big action. Leaders can really just begin to be intentional about just what you said, who's in the room or who's in the room that's not talking, right? And making space for people. But peers can be allies for people too. Maybe you don't have power in a situation, but it's also allyship to see somebody, to notice what's happening. If you see something, let's say somebody is talked over in a meeting or isn't given credit or something like that, one way to be an ally is to acknowledge that with the person, right? Even if there's not power involved. So thank you for that, Tracey.
Yes. Well, it's unusual. And I don't know if it's because I have been in the industry so long. When I talked about taking that job right out of college with no intention of staying more than 6 months, I've been in it now for 30 years, and I have a really unique situation in that right out of college, I take this job for a very young general manager. I think he was 28 and I was 22. And like I said, he had a lot of young employees, and he liked giving young people opportunity because someone gave him one. And his name is Troy Duhan. And he, I'm sort of a hybrid of the allies and mentors that I've had from the beginning because, my dad was my first one, and I learned a lot about being a professional and just professionalism and treating people a certain way and conducting myself a certain way. And, he tapped into confidence, like a dad does. And then I take a job for Troy, and anybody who knows my boss knows he is a very intense visionary. He can drive you crazy with his ideas because you can't execute them as fast as he comes with it. But he's a risk taker. He's a talker. He's very gifted. And he's the one that started giving me the opportunities in the other areas of the dealerships. And I just kept saying, okay, okay, okay. And that kept leading to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so his confidence in me, or just his need to fill a role in the dealership, allowed me to gain confidence. And then he has someone who, another unique situation to our company is, and we're privately owned. His best friend since they were like 5 is his partner. And he ran the dealerships with him initially when we had one. And he's been a mentor of mine as well. And what's funny is he's polar opposite of my boss. So, but I spent enough time with these two gentlemen that I got a little bit from one and a little bit from the other. Troy taught me to be aggressive and just take a risk. and get a voice. And Vincent taught me to listen and slow down a little bit and think things through, which are complete opposites. So I had to kind of find a middle ground, but I had both of their influence, and I still do to this day. Because I'm still working with them. So you know, they complement each other, and they certainly allow me to grow alongside of them. So those have been probably, along with my dad, my biggest allies and mentors. And then of course all the fabulous people and colleagues I meet through the industry. You know, I can rattle off names of women that I've worked with, whether they were like district service and sales managers, or you know, the factory program managers along the way, who just had conversation with me and would encourage me or compliment me, which in turn helped me find my voice. So I had all that influence as well, of just being put in those arenas. So that was really exciting. And then what happened is, over time, when being with the same company for so long, you know, my boss at the time, who was the general manager, he went out on his own and bought his first store, and he took 4 people with him, and I was one of them, myself and 3 gentlemen. And so I've gotten to be part of this company and growing it, which I feel very, very lucky to be a part of, watching it grow. But over time, what happens is, because you're with a company so long, people start coming to you and asking you questions or solutions, because they figure, well, you've been around a long time, and if I want to approach this way, what would you say? So I found myself getting asked my opinion a lot. And then that's where I had to learn to listen, you know, and not just fix, because I'm a fixer by nature. I do it as a job in the stores. I come up with solutions. So I try to do all those things and listen. And that just sort of lent itself to give me a chance to be an ally, and give me a chance to bring other people's names up in the room when they're not in there, and connect, be a connector. And I really like the way that feels when I see things connect and then things flourish. And I don't like to be a part of it. I just like knowing it happened, and that I could, you know, be the segue, or push someone out of their comfort zone. And why don't you do this? Or this is how I might handle it. So it sort of has lent itself, my tenure just sort of lent itself. People will come and they'll say, go ask Tracey, or they'll just come ask me. And I'm thinking, you guys give me way too much credit, because you have no idea how all over the place I can be. But that's where it's allowed me to do that, which has since allowed me in the last 3 years to feel very drawn, and very drawn for about a year before I spoke up about it, was to go to my boss, because we now have about 40 dealerships, was to go to my boss and say, I think we really need to jump on a women in leadership train. We're too big not to, and we don't have, like the industry, our group doesn't have enough female representation in leadership roles, and we have some really powerhouse women working with us. And because I've been around a while, I know that, and he knows that. But until you bring it up, you know, so thankfully he said, I said I would do it on one condition, because he said, that's a great idea, take it and run with it. And I said, well, I only want to do it on one condition. He said, what? I said, you need to stay out of it. You know, you're not a woman, and you're from the cloth that, you know, is, you know, a very male dominated arena, and so am I, but I think it's changing, and I'd like us to see us do it as well. So it's just all evolved, and it just evolves, and we try to make sure we keep up, and I think we're doing a good job. So that's how I've been able to be an ally, and that's how they've sort of helped me get there.
Tracey, thank you. And I can't wait to see what happens with the women's initiatives within.
Oh, I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited about it.
It's going to be amazing. And one thing I would say is, you know, being approachable isn't just about that you've been there for a long time, and that's like, you know, there is something.
And I talk a lot.
So, Kathy, my friend Kathy.
So, you know, as I've listened to Tiffany and Tracey, there is so many women, as well as my family, I'm from a large family, that have been kind of allies and supporters for me. But when I talk about allies, I like to talk about them from the external organizations that I've worked with for a very long time. You know, organizations like NAMAD, which is the National Association of Minority Automobile Dealers, organizations like General Motors and their Women's Retail Network, or General Motors and the Minority Dealer Development Organizations. You got Ford and their Minority Association. You have Stellantis or Chrysler and their minority associations. And then you have kind of women in auto. And so as I look at the industry and the organizations that I've been able and fortunate enough to be aligned with that really advocate and support the marginalized or the underrepresented whether it's salespeople, whether it's others in the industry, there's so many organizations out there. And I'm just fortunate to be a part of it and a part of those organizations. I think when I initially started my career, you know, many years ago, there were so many women that were part of those organizations where we were looking at how do we make a way for minority dealers. 95% of our minority dealers are first generation. And so we're starting to look at that next generation that are coming in. And so a lot of the opportunities that were afforded our majority dealers weren't necessarily afforded to the majority dealers or to the minority dealers. And so as you look at what they've been doing, whether it's, you know, going before our government and talking to them about things that impact our communities, whether it's just standing up and speaking up for us, it's just been an honor to do that. So when I think of allyship, I think of not only the people that have helped me individually in my career journey, but I also think of those organizations that are out there making a way for those that are looking for a path forward. And so I'm fortunate to be able to be part of that. I have a lot of respect for those organizations, and I am one of the original founding board members of Women in Automotive. So when you think of what Women in Automotive is doing really to advocate and support women, it doesn't matter what industry or what part of the auto industry you're in, whether you're making cars, whether you're selling cars, whether you're designing, all of those pieces play. And having someone that looks like us in those roles, that's a big message. But it's also the ability of stepping out a little bit and saying, what can I do to reach back to your comment earlier about paying it forward? How do I do that? How do I reach back and make sure that I'm giving access and opportunities to those that may not have them? And I think partnering up with organizations like the ones I mentioned are a great way to do that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Kathleen.
Yes, well, I absolutely would not be where I am without allies. And I think, you know, examining like what is an ally. So at the loosest definition, it's somebody who understands what your interests are and is actively working, you know, with you or alongside you or on behalf of you in the advancement of those interests. So the beautiful thing about being an ally is that this is a role that literally everyone can occupy. So as one example of what allies I have right now, I'm not even sure because of course I'm live participating in this panel, but everybody who is watching this panel right now is an ally. Why? Because they're taking the time to listen to us, to understand what our passions are, what our concerns are, what the things are that we want to move forward, and they're learning and they're listening because of course no group of people is monolithic. So women aren't a monolith, people of color aren't a monolith, right? Like, and so we each have our own individual interests, concerns, ideas, things that we need, you know, accessibility concerns based on what we're able to do, we're not able to do, all these things, right, that are unique to us as people. And so it's really like, how can we listen and participate for each other? And so I've been on a learning journey now for, you know, many years. That's not going to stop. We're never going to get to the point where we know everything and we're just now ready. And so it's a combination of the listening and action that has to be sort of paired together as we move forward together, right? And I think that's a really important concept. And I think allyship is part of where we get at inclusivity, honestly, because it is a role that can be occupied by everyone. Frankly, some of my biggest allies have been the stereotypical, you know, person that we think of when we think of someone in automotive, an older, you know, white guy. right? That is a great role for those people, is to be an ally for other people who don't look exactly like them, or for people who do, who still have, you know, other dimensions of diversity that you might not be able to immediately visibly see. Right? So, because there's so many different dimensions of diversity that we all embody, or that we have inside, that people might not even know if they don't take the time to listen. And so I'm super grateful to everybody who engages with me on a regular basis. Sandy, to you for, you know, giving us the space to speak about this, and to the many people who have, you know, stood up for me, stood with me, and stood by my side over the years, who've been ally day after day after day, as opposed to, you know, maybe for this moment. But both of those are equally important. And so I'm happy to both, you know, participate in that journey and the journey of other people. You know, we're all leaders, and the more people that you sort of lead or engage with, by the way, the bigger your responsibility is to be an ally for what, you know, many of the other women have said. I think Tiffany kicked us off with this, of like, who's in the room and who's not in the room, or who's in the room and who's not talking, and how we can use, you know, the privilege that we all have from our position, or various ways of showing up in the world, to use for people who might not have that same privilege or position or platform, or even in my case, just as big of a mouth and loud of a voice as I literally have, right, that I can use on behalf of other people.
I love that. Thank you. I love the whole idea of allyship being a responsibility, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to move into the third question. Now, this one is, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about equity, right? And there's a few reasons. There's this, I'm sure everybody's seen it. It's a meme or a picture that kind of really explains equity. And there's two. So the first one, there's a fence, and there's a able-bodied person who's able to see over the fence to watch the ball game. And then there's a little kid who is standing on a ladder, and then there's somebody who's in a wheelchair, and the wheelchair is on top of the box. Everybody can see the game. And then the next picture is really what illustrates equity. And there's no fence anymore. So what that says to me is that equity is about knocking down the barriers, right? So knocking down the fence. And lately in the HR world, oh, by the way, a fun fact from me is that I did not go to school originally for HR. I was going to be the next Barbara Walters. I went to school for mass communications. So, and
Well,
then
you have the presence for it. I want to say you have the presence.
That's what I was telling her at the beginning of this. She does this very well.
Thank you. You know, it's funny how life goes. It would be too long to tell you what happened to interrupt my education. But anyway, so
That's another podcast, right?
that's a whole nother LinkedIn Live. So, but in the HR world, there is a lot of movement and legislation designed to move pay equity forward, right? There are laws being made where in some states you can't post a job ad without putting the salary, right? There's pay transparency laws happening. So, you know, they're about trying to find equity. And there's a recent article in Automotive News that really looks they did a study. It's of 1,000 people. A very small percentage of those retail workers were female, right? So, but what it showed was a great disparity, like a $74,000 disparity in the wage gap. And there's other studies out there and that kind of dispute those numbers. But what we can all agree on is that there is a wage gap, right? Whether it's 70%, 80%, or 85%, there is still a gender wage gap. So what I'd like for us to talk about is like, how can we get rid of the fence, right? Often when I talk to people, you know, about things like this, there are barriers, right? And the rationale is, well, one thing might be that women, and which is true, women many times end up being the caregiver, right? And therefore can't put in all the hours. That's the fence, right? How do we start looking at these things as the fence and how, what can we do? And what I'd like to know from you all is, what are you seeing? What ideas are happening? How important is this for our progress? And in the end, how can we knock down these fences? Tracey, I'm going to start with you this time.
With my big loud voice in my mouth. I have to say that in my arena and in my experience, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years, the topic of, you know, um, pay equity and diversity and inclusion, all that has come to the forefront. And I think as an industry, we're doing a good job creating the awareness. And of course, we have to keep that up. I think there's been just as much talk about pay equity, but I don't find that momentum is as swift as the conversations about it, like as far as bringing it to fruition. There's a lot of talk, but I have my own theory on why we haven't done more with it and acted on it. If I look at, we talk about in our personal lives, generational things. In the auto industry, it's generational too. The things my dad believes are right and true for the auto industry are not what I think are. And they're very apparent in conversation. And the things, even with my boss and his, I'm gonna call it generation, and mine, which are only about 7 years apart, I find I can be a lot more flexible. While he's very open to change, he has to see it working for someone else first to make him comfortable with it, I find. Not with everything, but with things that are pretty significant that are going to change and pivot his entire, outlook on an industry that he's thrown everything into and enjoys and been successful at doing it a certain way. And it's like, now I have to give our company credit. Everyone is really trying to be aware. But I think as a rule, kind of like even with policy, whether we're talking about any policy we want to change, we'll say, well, what group cells are doing it already? Let's find out what they're doing and let's get together and come up what works for us. I think maybe if there was more, and I know there's companies out there that do it, but more auto industry companies, if there are people out there already doing stuff to close the wage gap, they need to share it and say, look, this is what we did. This is how we approached it, because it sort of helps fellow dealers, speaking as in a retail, go, okay, it's not going to do this to my bottom line. It's not going to do this to my culture. It's going to help here. It's going to help there. Same as when they look at things on the financial statement and say, well, if we do this and to get to this a little more per hours per RO, it'll move the butt. I just think there needs to be more shared action, because I think in those conversations, there needs to be more concrete actions that are shared instead of, yes, we need to do that. It needs to be, hey, so-and-so did this at this group and this is how they approached it. Because I think there's a comfort level there that'll help that momentum pick up a little bit. That's just my thoughts on it, at least from what I know, how we approach most solutions in our group. It's like, well, let's see what other people are doing, and did it flop or was it successful? So that's how I end up trying to network and ask a ton of questions. Of course, you don't find many dealers chasing down employees going, please let me pay you more, but yet they do see, they do see your value. And sometimes they just need to understand, and like anything else. So
Tracey, I love that. Thank you. And I am kind of transported back to the very, very first DEI panel that I did that was at Digital Dealer. And one of the questions that I talked with the panelists about was like, what do you think it's really going to take to move the needle, right? Like, we've been talking about these things forever and ever, and the needle moves a little bit.
Right.
Language is important. Sometimes we say we're making great progress when we really are. So
where's that progress and what are the details? Share.
Well, you know what? The answer that came back to me from 4 really amazing leaders in our industry was collaboration, right? And that's part of the reason why I started this council, right? Because we're all from all different sectors, right? So I think it is going to take all of us. I love
Yeah.
that, Tracy. Thank you. And Kathy, you already, right? Well, I've lost track of who I.
No, we're fine. You know, what I would tell you is from a CDK perspective, on an annual basis, as we do reviews and performance evaluations, we're really looking at compensation. We've worked with outside organizations to look at job titles and job roles and descriptions and to come up with kind of what's out there within the market. So I think that's good. And then we make adjustments kind of during that annual review process. But one of the things that I noticed, and I'll just call this out, and this is just my opinion about it, is women need to do a little better at negotiations. And I think that we don't necessarily fight because we come in already thinking that, well, maybe we don't have 100% of the skills, and we tend to start to rule ourselves out of the conversation as opposed to kind of doing head first and this is my value, this is what I bring. And it's sometimes hard to do that because of fear of either, losing the job or losing credibility within the organization. But I think when we do that, because to me, I think making the change is going to be a much longer process than we'd like. And I think it starts on an individual basis with saying, are you asking for what you're worth? And so many times, I don't think we do that. So yes, from a corporation perspective, the corporation tends to look at the whole. They look at all the roles, they look at a job, they look at a title. They're not necessarily, I don't believe, looking at an individual. So I don't think they're necessarily trying to pay us less. I do think that it just kind of somehow happens that way because of people that are making the decisions are not fully representative of who we are. But I do know that we have to put ourselves in a position of being able and being willing to take that risk and fight for or even ask. A couple of the ladies that I've talked to, and I mentor a lot of women over my career. And what's been interesting is when you talk to them, they're like, well, what they offered me was really good. And when you move into leadership, you know that what they offered you is probably kind of somewhere maybe toward the lower end of what is available to you. And so if you just take what's offered without at least pushing back or requesting something, at least going back to negotiate, I think we do leave a little bit on the table. So I think it's kind of more onus on companies to continue to look at and evaluate, are you being fair? But it's also on us to say, am I really getting what I'm worth, and not being afraid to take that chance to go back and say, hey, I want a little bit more, or maybe negotiate for what is of value to you.
Absolutely. Like, agree 100%. I came from a very patriarchal family, worked for my family a lot like Tracy, and where the rules are different for you when you're the kid of the, and I just always like, if I work hard, I had this idea that if I worked hard and did everything, that I would be rewarded, right? Like it would be here.
And many of us think that.
Isn't how it works.
Yeah, many of us think that. Why do I have to, you know how great I am, just, compensate me accordingly. And it doesn't always work that way.
Right, exactly.
Not initially out the gate. Sometimes you got to go back.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that we have responsibility too, right? It's so that's a really, really great point. Kathleen.
Yeah, so, I love looking at what we can do as individuals, which, Kathy started to tee us up for. So the other thing that we can do is we can really look at and understand how, our culture is supporting the status quo. And one of the things that our culture says is that talking about money is taboo. I'm not going to walk up to Kathy at a mixer event and be like, so how much money do you make? What does your comp package look like? But we should be doing that. We should be having that conversation. We should be feeling comfortable about that. Because when we start talking about it, that's when we start to understand what the disparity is and whether we're making the right amount of money, or, whether we've sort of boiled the frog slowly. Like we've been all of us have been at our companies a fair amount of time, right? Like, are we being compensated fairly? Certainly there's comp studies out there and things like that, that we could try to draw on, but those have a wild variance. And are they really talking to people who have roles that are similar to ours and all of this kind of stuff? So some states, yes, they've started to implement these pay transparency rules around posting jobs and stuff. Why? Because the transparency, you talk about that fence and literally being able to see into the ball game, right? This is how we see into the ball game. And somebody has to lead, and somebody has to be, again, the big mouth that sort of says, here's what I make. And so when my colleagues reach out to me and they say, hey, would you mind, like, do you think this is fair? I'm like, let me tell you how much I make and what I do and why I think I'm paid this way. So you can start to think about, like, are you being offered a fair, compensation, by this company that's thinking about hiring you or whatever else. And so I think we need to have some comfort to enter into that conversation and that space together and start removing that stigma, because the stigma is there to serve the status quo, and the status quo is that there's a gender pay disparity.
Kathleen, I am so struck by this. There is a saying in my life that is super important to me, and it is, you are as sick as your secrets. And as you were talking about this, I just thought, oh my God, that's it. We keep it as we keep this a secret,
Yeah.
right? And then, wow. Tiffany.
Well, and I think this has been a great conversation. I can't agree with Kathy and Kathleen more about being transparent and talking about it on your personal level with your personal networks and being able to break down those barriers. When I also think about organizations as well, how are organizations communicating the process out there? A lot of times, you get your total comp package and you may not know all of the work that's gone behind the scenes. And so really thinking about, as an organization, how can you communicate and be more transparent about that process? I know that's something that we really were trying to do this last year within TrueCar, to take those steps to make sure employees understood what we were doing in our biannual assessments, looking at the job benchmarks, looking at the pay data, making sure we shared that information so employees not only understood it, but felt comfortable that regardless of gender, we are looking at and paying equitably and fairly in that extent. And I also think looking at data, utilizing the data that you have, not only just looking at pay, but also looking at promotion, looking at retention, thinking about where are those gaps where people are falling out as well. So thinking about how organizations can utilize that data to really do that investigation, I think is going to be important for understanding that full picture, and then thinking about those steps and actions that you may need to take to make changes to ensure that there's pay equity.
Absolutely, right? Like, measure what we treasure. If we say this is important to us, let's begin to measure it, right? And I love that. And track all of these metrics.
Right.
Diversity is a metric. It's
Yeah.
just, it is a metric. It's not a strategy. It's inclusion is the strategy, right? So in interest of time, we started a little bit late. So first I'm going to ask all of you, because I respect your time. Are you okay if we go on another 5-10 minutes? Another question, just, the next question is about spreading the word, right? Like, often I believe, I never dreamed, okay, 3 of us fell into automotive, or 4 of us fell into automotive. Tracey grew up from automotive. I never, ever considered automotive in any of the sectors a career path for myself. And I think that continues, right? I think that, so how do we let young girls and women know about the amazing opportunities that we have in automotive, right? Like, so I'd love to hear about anything that your organization, do you think we can do this organizationally? Are you all doing something? What are some things that you think that we can do to attract young women to thinking about automotive as a career? So, Kathy, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Okay. Well, I am a big fan of mentoring and coaching and being there. And I think that, mentoring plays a big role in getting others to consider automotive, because as you start to talk about it, as you start to share your experiences, And I love stories. Stories when you share a story, whether it's mine or whether I took some creative liberties and I leverage someone else's story to make the point. I think women and young girls are starting to understand that. As an organization, we do a lot of events, like a hackathon with Girls Inc. and some of the other organizations to give them kind of that introduction into STEM, to talk about, the major technologies impacting our industry, whether that's EV, whether it's AI, whether it's connected cars. All of that technology is a good opportunity to really help young girls understand that there's more to it. Most, when I was coming through the industry and coming through my career, most people, when they thought of automotive, they thought of automobile dealership. They didn't think of the design. They didn't think of marketing. They didn't think of sales, all the other parts that make this industry flourish. And I also look at partnering up with schools like Kaiser University or Northwood, where you get an opportunity to touch these young people right there in their space and share with them these opportunities. One of the organizations I partnered with, and this was maybe about 5 years ago, was SAGSAW. See a Girl. See, and of course, I'm going to get it wrong now as I do my notes. But it's all about getting into the actual schools and doing programs and initiatives and events that just get them engaged so that they start to think about the automotive industry a little bit differently than they have, where it's not just about, ooh, I see, car dealerships, even though retail is a big component of the industry, but there's so many other careers, whether it's in accounting or whether, you're looking at just the technical side of it, there's so much more. And I think the more we're able to interact with young people in their space and talk to them about what's available in automotive, I think that's how we can help to impact young ladies as they come into this industry.
Awesome, Kathy. Kathleen, what do you think?
Well, I mean, look, there are a lot of different access points for this work, right? So we could do an entire panel on all the access points around really ways of drawing people in. So I'll focus on, two that Kathy didn't mention. So one is, as we think about attracting a diverse set of people, not necessarily just women, but all different kinds of people into automotive. We've spoken about this before, the identities that we wear that you can see, you're going to guess that we're women. A couple of us are women of color. You're going to see that, but we all have other identities. So for example, I'm a queer woman. You might not know that, I'm very straight passing as it turns out, right? But I am. And so the extent to which I have the ability and the courage to wear my internal or not necessarily seen identities externally and be in this industry and talk about it and be very visible and vocal and everything in all the ways that I can be, super important so that other people start to see themselves fitting here. Right. And so I think we're doing that. We're trying to model that by being on this panel today. So that's one thing. The second thing is, let's be honest, so we get to a certain level in our career that brings other benefits like financial freedom. So where are we spending our money and how do we fund or help to fund scholarships? How do we participate in other places where, our monetary contributions are going toward creating this visibility either through organizations that we're a part of or scholarship foundations or other ways that we can make sure our colleagues who also represent different dimensions of diversity are able to be seen, heard, visible, present at events, from, funding an individual person to go to an event, which I recently did, or contributing to a scholarship, like I mentioned, or other ways that we can think about the power of the financial aspect. We get equity, right? Or we get good salaries for ourselves because we're negotiating, doing all that other stuff. Then let's spend them in the right ways so that, our dollars are speaking for us when we're not literally physically in the room or on the call.
Wow. So I'm sitting here like, because each of your answers for all of these questions are just amazing. It's so awesome. Tiffany?
I think we've been hearing this theme, but representation matters. It matters. It's so important because people need to see those tangible examples to understand what really is possible. So thinking about how we as organizations can do that storytelling, whether it's in our marketing campaigns, whether it's in our social media or advertising, we really have to showcase our diversity, and we have to show up as role models and show those success stories to the next generation to really inspire that talent and that extent. And so I think about, some of the things and the work that we do internally, we need to make sure that we're getting that out there externally and taking advantage of those networking opportunities when we're going to conferences and meeting the young women where they're at as well. So I think there's a lot more that we can do, but I know how important representation is. And that's something that we're continually needing to do in this organization and in this industry to really tell those stories and make sure it's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracey?
Agreed. I mean, I think that what both Kathy and Tiffany were saying, as far as, initially you think of just the dealership, and there's just so much more to it, whether it be, I mean, of course, I'm speaking from a dealership, but we just had a group meeting right before this call with all of our stores, and we were talking about recruiting and retention, and we track that retention and what we need to do different. But we talked about, going into high school career days, not just going to the tech schools for those who want to learn a trade. Let's go into high schools, let's go to job fairs, let's go to all the events or hold events at the dealership. And, like, for example, the high school career days, I said, I could be at a table, with our trainer, but then I have my table with my Premier Women in Leadership banner and my website, where they can see that we're a company that invests in your career, throughout the company, male, female, everyone, so all departments, not just sales, so from a retail standpoint, I think that we need to continue to have a presence in all of those arenas to educate them and tell the stories like you're talking about. And then anything relating to our job postings, something like that employee resource group being a part of it, don't leave that out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that storytelling is so important, and building cultures of inclusion, right? When I look at the generations, we touched on generations earlier. Tracey, I think it was you that there's generational diversity too.
Yes.
And the wants and needs of 64% of our workforce is millennial and Gen Z.
Yeah.
Right? Gen Alpha, hot on the heels of Gen Z. So these generations so all employers need to really, I believe, should be thinking about how are they building a culture that not just looks like them, as, which representation, you got to see it if you want to be it. But we need to really start working on.
Yeah, because the more recent generations really want to work for someone who stands for something, or they can help be a change in something. And
I tell you what,
want to tell the stories, that's where it comes in.
They have options, right? I say this all the time, the labor shortage, it's not a myth. It's just real that we don't have enough working age people to fill all the job openings. So, to get ahead. So, ladies, we're gonna close now. We're a little bit over, and I appreciate your time. So let's do, instead of the usual question that's at the end of every single panel, right? Like let's do a word, right? A word, if you can come up with a word with how you're feeling for the future of women in automotive. So I'm going to call on Tiffany first.
Okay, I'm trying to stick to just one word. I'll just
you can say more than one word.
I'll say it's inspiring, inspiring, and collaborative. So I think just, having this conversation is inspiring. And again, I think it's so important to collaborate with women across our industry. So thank you.
Awesome. Tracey.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of communication on any and all levels, just whether it's through mentoring, whether it's through self-advocacy, whether it's through collaboration. I mean, communication, the more we share, the more we're going to learn. And let's get specific, like, Kathy was talking about. Let's throw the details out there. Everything we can share, let's share.
Thank you. Kathy.
So I would say two words, which is empowered, when I think about networks, right? So empowering your network, when I think of the future, is the better we're able to build, network, and grow. I wish this was advice I had given myself years ago about building and maintaining a strong network, because you would be amazed at the people you see and how you can leverage those networks as you grow your career. So be empowered and leverage your network.
Awesome. Kathleen.
I'll just close this out by saying on frickin' fire.
I love it.
I knew she'd come up with something good.
Yes,
Freaking fire. I love it. I love it. So let me switch over to the tab that says that we end the stream, and everybody say goodbye. Thank you, LinkedIn. Thank you for anybody who's watching. And if you're watching on the replay, please reach out. Thanks. I'm feeling grateful.
Yay.
Thank you.
everyone.
All right, so it ended. The
Yeah.
live stream. I ended the live stream.
I
Thank
will
you.
Mine says
jump
it's
into
still
my
live.
next meeting. Oh, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed
Yes,
it.
thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much
Bye,
for your
guys.
Bye, Tracy.